4 games in, and the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series is still going strong, with multiple smash hit games all getting platinum re-releases on PlayStation, and with the release of Pro Skater 3, we were now well and truly into the next generation. But that's not to say I found Pro Skater 3 to be perfect, with the main issues of mine stemming from this being a hard reset in the game's underlying technology, with this new iteration of the game engine itself just feeling a little heavier and stiffer to control than I would have liked, which did kind of sour some of my time with that game, even if I did like it overall. But much like the skateboards themselves, we've just got to keep on rolling with a bit of this. Anthony Bird of Prey's Professional Skateboarder 4. And yeah, after finding out that it was Pro Skater 3 I played all those years ago when I was much younger, I'm pretty sure that means I've never actually played this one, so yeah, let's give it a go. First up, I'm obviously going to have to talk about this Neversoft logo. I always like to see what they're going to do with these, and this time we've got a big old monkey pulling the eyeball out of his nose. And yeah, I do like this one, sure, but nowhere near as much as the last two. Pro Skater 2 had that awesome guitar riff, and Pro Skater 3 had Mr. Eyeball showing off some of his sick tricks. Whereas this one, it's pretty chill and tame in comparison, but, you know, it's okay, I guess. Monkey! After that, you've got the traditional montage of all of the pro skaters doing their thing, and then here we are in the main menu. Same as before with the last 3 games, I'll mainly be going into this for the career mode, so I can see the sights, complete the goals, and get a feel for any gameplay changes made here in this entry, with anything else beyond that being something I'll look into later on. Anyway, at first, things seem normal enough with the options you have here. You've got the career mode, single session, free skate, create a skater, and build a park, along with a few other things tucked away here and there within the menus. But it's when you start the career mode, that's when you'll immediately see that this is not the same kind of career mode as the last 3 games. This time around, it's really different. The main thing that's going on here is that levels are no longer confined to a list of multiple goals that you have to complete in a 2-minute session. This time around, you're simply dropped into an open level with a bunch of NPCs dotted around as mission givers. Then you'll approach one of those to begin doing a small task that's usually given its own individual timer. After most missions, you're given a stat point, and from there you can mix them up however you like, so you're still going to get the gradual stat-based character progression from the previous games, but like a lot of things here, it's just done in a slightly different way. Firstly, stat points were dished out automatically, then you had to buy them, then you had to find them, and now you're given them as a reward. Another thing that's made a comeback is cash. You'll get given some for completing missions, as well as finding it within the levels themselves, and for my playthrough at least, I didn't really need any of it, except for unlocking bonus levels much later on. You can also spend this cash on extra cosmetic items for the Create a Skater mode, but annoyingly, you can't preview any of them before you commit to spending, which I kind of hate. But either which way, I didn't spend that much money here because my skater already looks perfect. Anyway, a lot of the time these individual missions are kind of what you would have been doing in the original career mode setup anyway, but each goal is now given its own timer. Sometimes you'll have a really simple goal to do, but others are a little bit more involved, where you're doing some sort of move to trigger a mechanism, or destroy part of the environment, or even tame some wild animals to make something happen. And when I say these things can be a bit more involved, even then, the gameplay itself is usually just one or two very specific things you need to do, so missions never last that long. But these ones usually have a little bit more going on to build up a small narrative towards whatever it is you need to do. You know, one of the things I really liked about Pro Skater 3 was how they'd sort of taken that classic goal structure, but grounded each goal within each level a little bit better, and on some occasions, like in the Los Angeles level, made all of the goals tie together into a small narrative. And yeah, I had to give a shout out to a good idea when I saw it, and now in Pro Skater 4, we almost have the next step of that idea, with pretty much all of these levels having certain missions appear within a set order that kind of tell their own story. I definitely don't think this is one giant leap towards a narrative-driven game or anything like that, at least not yet anyway. Because you are still going to have characters just stand there and say things like, oh hey, go do this thing, with no real reason behind it. But when there are reasons, things are very much in the same kind of setup that Pro Skater 3 had. You know how it is, there's no major storytelling beats here, but instead you'll just have a selection of smaller scale things happening from time to time that you'll naturally end up being a part of. This time we have things like helping a decorator clear some seagulls off a pier he's about to paint, just to have the pier collapse and then attract the attention of a shark, which you then have to get rid of. Or here, in the zoo level, you'll be helping out a zookeeper escape the lion cages after he got stuck in there, but doing this will accidentally let them out, and later on, you'll have to become human bait in order to lure them back into their pens. It is a lot like Pro Skater 3 in that sense, but again, like a lot of things here, it's just done in a slightly different way. All of these goals are no longer chucked into a list of ones that you have to complete in a rapid-fire series of box ticking. No, this time, it's a lot more relaxed in that sense, with each mission letting you focus on one specific thing at a time. That being said, not every single one of these missions is a good time, which is where this shift to the new format starts to feel a little bit more questionable to me. Like here with this mission in the zoo involving an elephant. It's just so vague about what you actually have to do here. It's put out there by this NPC as a warning to your skater not to do anything near the elephant's head to save freaking it out, which obviously when a game says that, then the game wants you to do it. But I was messing around for ages and I couldn't figure out what to do, so in the end I went online to look up what it was all about, and it turns out you just have to ollie onto its back from up here on this rooftop, which really doesn't make any sense at all. There's also a few missions where you have to use the skateboard in a few different ways, like sitting down, leaning back and doing some inline skating around the checkpoint courses, and you know what? This isn't too bad. I don't hate this. I obviously wouldn't want the entire game to be this, but it's pretty fun for what it is. Your movement speed is faster, you can jump over ground obstacles, the control is pretty tight, and it doesn't drag on for too long either. It's a pretty nice series of one-off events to do, so yeah, why not? But for me, this all falls apart here during the Snake Run Slalom Challenge, where the increased movement and turning speed are leveled up to the extreme because of the downward hill combined with the entire thing being sloped on either side. This thing is super finicky, and annoyingly, it's only the final part of the run that seems really difficult, which means I had to sit through the first two phases over and over and over again to get another chance at the one bit I was messing up on at the very end. There's actually a few missions throughout this game just like that, where they're easy to understand, but a little difficult to do. However, the difference between them and the Snake Run Slalom is that a lot of them are fun through learning from your own mistakes and becoming a master at the ever-expanding combo-focused moveset, whereas the Snake Run just puts you in this bullshit scenario where you have no freedom to do anything fun along the way. I think one example of a really tricky mission done right is this one here, where you have to collect items in order to help a prisoner escape from Alcatraz. I must have tried this one over and over again like 20 times before I did it, because it essentially boils down to you skating one really long line around the entire prison, but every time I failed, I couldn't blame the game. I knew exactly where I was going wrong and I just had to be better at it. This thing, however, well, this just takes any of that fun you get from mastering the controls and instead makes it become Tony Hawk's Pro Increased Movement Sensitivity. Anyway, every now and then you'll also have the option of doing these minigame things. Yeah, I don't really get why I'm here playing tennis, baseball, and doing other things like this within a skateboarding game, but thankfully you don't actually have to do any of these. They don't count as missions and are more like an optional way of earning some extra pocket money. Money that I just said I didn't actually care about earning in the first place, so you know I didn't bother with any of these outside of getting this basic footage. It's just kind of weird that they're here at all, so I thought it would be worth mentioning them. Each level also has a few of the classic goals from previous games slapped into them as their own standalone missions. I always did like trying to hunt down the skate letters and earn high scores in the previous 3 games, so that's always fun to see pop up here, but I'm not totally sold on things like this actually being their own missions with their own timers. These OG goals just seem too simple and objective for it to be the only goal to do when you have this much time given to you to actually do it. Which is something I take issue with for a few mission types here, but before I go down that road, I've got to give a shout out to collecting the combo letters. Yeah, this is such an easy way to twist that original skate letters idea, but I love it. You've just got to grab all of the letters here in one single combo, which is sometimes easier said than done, and towards the end of the game, these end up being pretty tough, but really fun to get right. These kind of missions I don't mind, because again, it's all about mastering that movement system, and so it naturally feels great when you pull off some of these crazy combo lines. Now, none of these goals take a particularly long time to do on their own, but another massive shout out has to go to not only having the option to immediately retry the last objective you attempted without having to go back to the mission giver, but also exactly where that option is placed on the pause menu. You hit start, then you press down, and then you press X. Sound familiar? Well, it should do, because that's exactly where the retry run option was in the last 3 games, so the muscle memory of pressing those 3 buttons at turbo speed is still there. One other thing this change in structure has really helped me appreciate is being able to freely skate around and just enjoy this movement system and explore the levels at my own pace. Sure, free skate has always been an option since the very first game, but for me there was always this sense of it being a bit of a waste of time in the more literal, real-world sense. Yeah, it's good for learning the controls in a stress-free environment, I guess, but before now, if you were in the middle of a career mode session and fancied a timeout, then you'd have to hit start, back out of the level, which would trigger a loading screen, then go through the main menu to pick which level you wanted to free skate in, and then go through another loading screen before you could do any of it. And then whenever you were done free skating, you'd have to do the entire thing again in reverse just to get back to the career mode where you could start making some actual progress again. Now, I wouldn't say I'm an impatient person when it comes to this sort of thing. I've sat through plenty of games with way longer loading times than these ones before now, but I do think it's a lot of hoops to jump through in order to just turn the timer off for a few minutes, you know? Well, here in Pro Skater 4, that ain't no problem anymore. Once I realized what they were doing here with this new mission-based structure, every single time I unlocked a new level, I would always, without fail, just spend around 10 minutes or so messing around before doing any missions, seeing where I could go, what I could do, and get a feel for some of the combo lines, all the while knowing I could get started on making some real progress in the career again whenever I wanted, without interruption. And I kinda love that. It does make me wonder why free skate is even an option on the main menu anymore though, because it's basically the same as the career mode, except there's no missions. But you can actually have no missions within the career mode by just choosing not to do them. Well, that and the fact you need to progress in the career mode to unlock the other levels to even use within free skate anyway, and like I just said, whenever I unlock a new level, I tend to just freely skate around them for fun anyway because there's no timer in the career mode between missions, so I don't get it. Am I missing something here? I don't understand why this is here at all. What is this? Who are you? What do you want?
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Oh, wait a second. It's probably so you can play these levels in split screen. Anyway, let's just pedal that back a second, because as much as I do really like having the option to freely roam around for fun in between doing missions, now that it's gone, I guess I do kind of miss the rush of trying to complete multiple goals on a 2-minute timer, or at least I miss the option to do that. As far as I can tell, it's now completely gone in favour of this mission-based structure, which, for the most part, it is okay. I mean, I do like what Neversoft have done here, but only half the time. Any missions that involve things happening to the environment around you, or ones that involve a more drawn-out objective that relies purely on the technical mastery of this game's movement system, they all feel totally justified being here and presented in this way. But a lot of the time, you will still have people literally ask you to pull off one singular trick, or to just do a specific trick off of an item in that level, or just reach a high score. And because of how quickly anyone with even the slightest bit of skill with these games could do these things, which, hey, I guess that now includes me after finishing the first 3 games, they just feel so out of place when given their own timers like this. And it's not that I don't like doing these kind of things. I mean, I've just enjoyed 3 entire games of exactly that, but these quick, one-shot objectives work really well as part of a list of goals that you can rush around to try and do in one go. Not so much as a singular goal with its own timer. You know, when the explanation for the thing you need to do takes longer than the total gameplay required to actually do it, then what's the point? That being said, I wouldn't want to completely undo what we have here, as this new format is pretty good, but any classic styled objectives being given their own timer is just not the right way to do this. I think the best of both worlds would have been to mostly keep everything as it is now, with mission givers, special event cutscenes, levolution triggers, and all of that stuff, but keep the smaller scale arcade goals to one side, and once you finish all of the missions in a level, have a completely optional final mission handed to you by Tony Hawk himself, where he'll just say something like, "Hey man, for this mission we're going old school pro skater. Here's a bunch of things I need you to do in 2 minutes. Get going." And then it could display a list, or better yet, some of those fancy aerial shots from Pro Skater 3. And then you're in, with a 2-minute timer and a bunch of random bullshit to collect and do. I think that would work great. Maybe a slightly longer time, like 3 minutes, because these levels are bigger and more open than the previous games, but yeah, that way you would get all of the benefits of Pro Skater 4's new career mode format, but with some of the faster paced arcade fun tucked away to one side for fans of the first 3 games too. Stepping back into reality though, I don't hate what they've done here, and I do feel some kind of shake-up was needed for this series, but it's almost as if Neversoft couldn't quite commit to the idea, so there's a lot of these arcade-style goals lingering around which, yeah, while they are still fun to do, they just don't feel right being here when presented in this way. Okay, so next up is something I went into this one feeling very cautious about, with that being the overall game feel. You know, the physics of its movement systems, the way you move around, how freely things flow together, that sort of thing. The kind of stuff I would normally talk about when discussing a movement-focused 3D platformer, which, well, you know, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's basically a movement-focused 3D platformer, so it's pretty important stuff. So, the very first thing I did here in Pro Skater 4, thanks to that freeform, no time limit career mode malarkey, was to just play around for a while and get a feel for how this feels. And more importantly, to see if Neversoft had fixed those small but noticeable issues I had with Pro Skater 3. Because these kind of gameplay systems live or die on the hill of absolute player control, and last time, I don't know, everything just felt a little bit too heavy and cumbersome when it came to air tricks, no matter how much they were leveled up, and it really did affect my long-term enjoyment of that game. Not to the point where it was ruined or anything. I mean, I still liked Pro Skater 3, but it was an issue I could always tell was just there in the background, you know? Whereas here in Pro Skater 4, well, long story short, they fixed it.
Thank you. This is the best day of my life.
Everything just feels that little bit tighter and more responsive now, and all of the trick animations no longer require you to wait until your character has returned to a neutral position in order to land them. This is something I found to be kind of difficult to visually demonstrate last time, but from just playing Pro Skater 3, I knew something was going on here. But now, the very frame you let go of that grab trick input, your skater will be in a position to land correctly, assuming you're facing the right way, of course. And yeah, I cannot put into words how happy this made me feel, because I knew from this point on, there's multiple games that were made using some form of the game engine from Pro Skater 3 as its foundation, and I knew if Neversoft hadn't fixed the issues I had with that game in particular, then there's a chance I would have had similar complaints about a lot of these games going forward. But yeah, literally 60 seconds into playing this one, and I'm not concerned about any of that anymore, because this feels great to play. In terms of how things feel in the moment-to-moment gameplay and how your skater moves around and how easily and seamlessly you can drop in and out of doing these crazy combos and awesome air tricks, out of all of these games so far, for me, this is easily the best one, without a doubt, and I am so stoked that a little bit of course correction was done here. That's not to say I think Pro Skater 3 is a bad game whatsoever, because I think it's a great game with some excellent levels to go through, but the new technology behind it meant that that game was basically having first game jankiness all over again. But now, we are so back into that more polished sequel feeling, like Crash Bandicoot 2, Spyro 2, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Everything here has just been smoothed out a little bit, and it's all the better for it. With that said, I don't really need to go in depth with the actual controls here, because it's all to the set standard of the series by this point. And of course, the big extension moves from the last two games with the manual and the revert have carried over as well, but alongside those, we have a handful of other nice additions here. First of all, we have the spine transfer. You do this by pressing R2 after launching up from a vert ramp, and if there's another one on the other side, you can easily bridge one ramp to the other. For me, this is a move that feels really natural to do, and I love how much speed you can gain by doing this if you start up high and then drop down into a lower vert ramp. And of course, like everything else here, it all flows together perfectly, so you can combo in and out of this as much as you like. Something else that's new is being able to switch between doing different tricks when doing a grind, manual, or lip trick by mashing the face buttons in a different order, with each 2 button presses resulting in a different trick. This ends up being an easy to pull off but really fun way to earn some extra points, because each one will add to your score multiplier. And yeah, there's something nice about doing a bit of controlled button mashing in between the more precise movements you need for doing everything else. This sort of thing is generally here for the manual to become an entire selection of new flatland tricks, but I do like the option of mixing up grinds in the same way. Another new addition to this moveset is being able to level out your skater mid-air by pressing the R2 button. This is mainly here for those times when you've launched off of a vert ramp but hit the angle slightly wrong and are about to land straight into the floor. You were able to get out of this before now if you just happened to be above a grind rail and remembered to pull back and hit triangle in time, but now you can use this in all sorts of other situations as an extra way of avoiding a face plant. Something that in hindsight, I feel has been an issue from time to time in all of the games leading up to this one, because I go back and see this happen all the time in my footage, so now that this is here, I don't think I'd ever want to go without it. It's a simple move, but it's a great one. The only new move that I'm not really fussed about here is sketching, where you grab onto the back of a car and let it drag you around, Marty McFly style. This is good for gaining speed before doing a big jump, but that in and of itself is really situational. Most of the time you're only ever really going to want to do this when a mission specifically tells you to do it. Like here, where you have to cling onto the back of a stolen car, or here where you have to grab onto the back of an elephant, or here where you need to use it to gain enough speed to do a really big jump out into the bay. Aside from that, it's just not something I could see myself wanting to use when generally playing around and exploring these levels, or just skating around for fun, you know? All of these new mechanics may not be as mind-bogglingly game-changing as the manual and the revert when they were added into the mix, but I would say most of these make for a pretty seamless and fun addition to what you could already do. With this series in particular, I feel like Neversoft had a really good eye for spotting any oversights in their combo-based movement system that prevented you from moving around seamlessly, and then coming up with something to fill those gaps with each new game. You know, it's almost as if they were filling up the holes in a barrel that was constantly leaking water. In the first game, we were limited to what we could do in the air and on rails, and so the manual filled that gap. Then it became obvious that vert ramps themselves were becoming an obstacle when it came to taking those combos even further, and so the revert filled that gap. And now, transferring from one vert ramp to another via spine transfer and leveling yourself out, allowing you to land safely into a manual regardless of where you are, well, that's just another couple of gaps filled. It's just really interesting to see all of this gradually shape itself into the moveset I remember having when I played American Wasteland all those years ago, and although we're not quite there yet with this entry, it's just great to see this series evolve in the right direction over time, and it's precisely why I wanted to play each of these games in order. It's a great thing to see. I'm loving this so far. Going through the career, same as before, you'll unlock more levels as you go along, and although you'd think this new setup for the career mode would mean for a totally new way of progressing through it, well, that's not really the case. Progression is now all about how many pro points you've earned, which you'll get by completing the missions that are handed out to you. You'll then spend those points on unlocking a new destination, and that's it. So it's pretty much giving you the same kind of wiggle room you had with completing goals in the previous 3 games. After all, you can still just do the bare minimum required to make any progress and move on if you really want to, so it's all just done in a slightly different way. Complete the missions and unlock more levels. There might be more to it than that, maybe, but I was just going around and doing all of these missions anyway, and I very easily managed to unlock all of the main levels here, so yeah, maybe there isn't any more to say on that one. It's all fairly straightforward as far as I can tell. Anyway, for the levels themselves, once again, I've got to say, I think we've got a pretty good variety of locations here with the college, San Francisco, Alcatraz, Kona Skate Park, the shipyard, London, the zoo, and a couple of bonus levels that I'll talk about later on. But as far as my thoughts on those levels go, I'm not gonna lie, this kind of feels like one of those cursed monkey paw wishes, because yeah, Neversoft may have fixed all of my smaller issues with the previous game and its weird physics that I couldn't quite get to grips with, but the levels here that you do all of this stuff in just don't feel as good as the ones in Pro Skater 3 as far as I'm concerned.
God damn it!
Now, I do still think most of these levels are okay, but a lot of the time, because of this more segmented, mission-based structure, certain areas of these levels feel like they've been designed in isolation with one specific goal in mind, rather than the entire level being made with equal focus and flow, and then having goals dotted around in a way that fits each part of them. It kind of goes back to what I said about the last 3 games, really, with me preferring the more medium-sized levels, because some of the bigger ones did have that issue of a lot of dead space, and we get a lot of that here in a few levels of Pro Skater 4. And I'm all for levels being more open-ended, but they need to be a fun virtual skate park first and foremost, disguised as these various locations, in order for them to be really fun to play around in. At least that's what I got from playing the first 3 games. You know, the places you visit in these games have to forego at least some real-world logic in order for them to play well as these wacky arcade skateboarding arenas, whereas here, it feels like they've picked the level themes and then made somewhat accurate versions of how those places would be laid out in the real world, and then added in all of the ramps and rails and skate park stuff afterwards. It's almost as if they got really far into laying out everything like this, and then realized at the last minute, oh shit, this is supposed to be a Pro Skater level. It also doesn't help that a handful of these goal-specific areas within the levels almost feel totally gated off too. Not literally, although sometimes it is literally, but but the combo lines to and from them don't always work as smoothly as I'd like when compared to the other levels in this series so far. I'm just saying, a little bit less dead space here and there with a bunch of trickable objects all over the place in ways that branch out and naturally flow together would have been pretty good. You do get that here every now and then, but as a whole, these levels are just not as tightly designed in that aspect as I'd like, especially now that we have even more moves that allow for even bigger combos, but it sometimes feels like a struggle to find places where I can comfortably use all of them. I think all of this simply comes down to the fact that these levels are much bigger than they've ever been before, but that isn't always the best route to take. Still, there is fun to be had here for me depending on which level I've chosen. The college level in particular feels really good, which means we are 4 out of 4 with the excellent opening levels in these Pro Skater games. Later on, you can revisit previous levels as some of the pro skaters themselves to sort of recreate a trick they became famous for doing, which I guess this could be interesting, but these missions, to me at least, I just don't think are all that fun. Each one is kind of like that snake run challenge I mentioned earlier on, where they're all just the right combination of being short, super specific, and kind of difficult to do, meaning you'll get stuck doing the same thing over and over again, which I really don't have the patience for. If you do, then fair enough, I guess, but for me, these games excel when you're really able to move around, so being stuck anywhere doing the same thing on loop for 15 minutes at a time really doesn't appeal to me. So yeah, it's not the end of the world, but I do have to acknowledge that I prefer the levels from Pro Skater 3 to the ones we have here, even if I do think Pro Skater 4 controls a lot better. It's a shame. Each one of these games is lacking in an area I think the other one excels at. Anyway, for the Unlockables, you've got a couple of extra levels here like the Carnival and Chicago, which are both okay, I guess, but they act more like a couple of extra regular stages to play rather than an out-and-out bonus stage. You know, it kind of feels like they've been taken away from the end of the career mode and just placed in here for some reason. Also, one of these is literally an advertisement for another game entirely, which I can't decide whether or not that's clever cross-promotion or just kind of annoying. Either which way, once you go into these, they're presented just like every other level in the career mode with their own missions to do, so I really do feel like these should have been included within that career mode as they are, and instead have some classic levels thrown in as a bonus. Sure, they wouldn't have worked well within this new career mode format, but just having them here to play around in with all of this new movement tech would have been pretty cool. Maybe they could have thrown in the original goal timers too, just so we have some version of that original gameplay tucked away within Pro Skater 4. As well as bonus levels, there's also a small number of extra characters to play as, and at first I was a bit disappointed with them as they're all fairly standard to play as, until yeah, you might be able to tell that this game came out around about the time those prequel movies were still fresh in everybody's minds, but the real neat thing about Django here is that one of his special moves is a fully functioning jetpack. Get that special meter filled up and then blast him off into the sky. I also love using this thing to cheese my way back up to higher areas of the level really quickly, and it feels so good to be able to do this whilst keeping up your combo. As much as I love Spider-Man as a character, I've gotta say Django Fett is probably the best secret character in these games so far. That jetpack move completely changes the way you can play this game, and it's really fun to just mess around with. It's definitely not something I would want from the very start of the game though, which is what makes him a great bonus character. Going into the Creator Skater mode, and everything seems pretty similar to before with the various colour sliders and options for clothing, but overall I feel like there's maybe a little bit less to choose from here. I don't know, there could be more to choose from, to be honest. It's kind of hard to tell seeing as I'm just making a version of me and that I'm super generic looking apparently. but I did try to make a few random characters, and again, it's a little bit hit and miss. But hey, I tried to make Lara Croft again because everybody knows what she's supposed to look like, and yeah, I think she looks better than she did in Pro Skater 3 at least. Surfing around on the menus for anything else of note, and yeah, Create a Park is here again, but to be honest, it's not really that exciting. I think this is a nice feature to have, for sure, and it was something pretty special when it first showed up in Pro Skater 2, but by now, it is basically just here and seems to be doing the exact same thing. That's not to say I think this is bad, but I just don't really have anything new to add to my thoughts on it, so until anything insanely new and exciting happens with it, I think I might just leave this feature alone for a while. Overall, I think Pro Skater 4 is pretty good. But I'd be lying if I stood here and said that I feel it's a net improvement to everything we had before this, because I really do feel like this is the polar opposite to my thoughts on Pro Skater 3 in so many ways. Yeah, there is a lot I do like here, and a big part of it is the small but incredibly welcome course correction to this game's physics and overall feel when compared to Pro Skater 3. Moving around here just feels so much better than any of the previous games, and being able to just take some time out and freely roam around like this within the career mode was a pretty good call, not to mention this selection of fairly useful new moves that we have here. It's all pretty good stuff. But the thing is, some of these goals just don't really work when put into this new format, with a lot of previously fun objectives now feeling like a bunch of filler content, with a side order of other unrelated filler content from time to time as well. I just feel like what we have here with this more open-ended career mode format should have been an optional way of playing through this game, with the other option being the original 2-minute timer mode, just to kind of balance things out a bit. But more importantly, it's those levels. There's no way around it really. I just don't think they're as well designed and intricately laid out as the last few games as far as I'm concerned, so I'm left at a bit of an impasse here. It really does feel like each of these games excels at the very thing I take issue with in the other. You know, I've made it pretty clear that I'm not a big fan of Pro Skater 3's physics, and while 4 does fix that, it's at the cost of arguably worse levels, and its career mode feels a bit confused as to what it wants to be at times, so I don't really know what to think here. It's a shame I can't be more definitive on my thoughts with this one, but that's just how I feel. I guess the main takeaway with all of this for me is that I can see what Neversoft were trying to do in order to mix things up, but ultimately it didn't quite hit the mark for me, and while I do really appreciate some of what they did here, well, now that the excitement of better movement controls and more time to use them are out of the way, I can say that Pro Skater 4 isn't necessarily the sequel I was after. You know, if Pro Skater 2 was a significant but straightforward sequel to the original game, then this, sure, it's a significant sequel to Pro Skater 3, but it is not straightforward at all. It keeps veering off in all of these different directions, and because of that, I just don't really know what to think of it most of the time. Anyway, now we're done with the PS2 version, it's time to take a look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 for the PS1. And yeah, it's kind of crazy that a PS1 version of this game even exists at all, but I guess that speaks volumes to how popular this series was back in its day, so yeah, let's check it out. Like the PS1 port of Pro Skater 3, this was handled by another Activision studio, with Vicarious Visions at the helm this time. And yeah, this is a studio I'm actually pretty familiar with. Out of all of their games, the ones that I've played so far include Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, those Game Boy Advance Crash Bandicoot games, Crash Nitro Kart, a bit of Skylanders, some Destiny 2 content, and I think the most noteworthy ones would be the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy, and of course, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2. I've actually played a fair bit of this Pro Skater remake in between working on all of these videos, and if you want to know what I think of that, well, I'll get to it eventually. I'm not gonna lie though, this is a pretty decent selection of games. There's not much focus here with them usually working on whatever Activision have told them to work on, But for what it's worth, all of these are pretty solid, so yeah, here's to you, Vicarious Visions. I hope nothing bad happens to them. Same as Pro Skater 3's PS1 port, this is basically a massive Pro Skater 4 themed DLC pack for Pro Skater 2, with it being the same engine, same physics, same character customization, and same overall feel as that game, but it's got the new levels from the bigger console version of Pro Skater 4 thrown in here. I would complain, but I kind of expected it to be exactly this anyway. But again, to be fair, a few of the new moves from the PS2 version have made their way down to this one as well. So you can spine transfer and even change grind and lip tricks mid-combo, which is great to see. Changing grind and lip tricks is a little bit more finicky here because you do have to press a directional button and triangle, which makes the left and right options a bit riskier because it will affect your balance. But the fact these things are here, retroactively added into this engine on this console 2 years after the series had moved on to bigger and better things, it's kind of impressive on its own, and you can genuinely do some great combos here with this more fleshed out moveset. It's just kind of fun having this much flexibility here and not being restricted to the 2-minute timer whilst still using the more heavy-handed PS1 retro engine and its janky physics. It's as if I've stumbled into an alternate timeline or something. It's pretty cool. Even the levels themselves, whilst taking a little bit of a hit here and there with the stage layouts, they're still pretty big for what they are and recognizable when compared to the PS2 versions. Sure, the time of day or weather might be a little bit different here and there, but outside of that, I would say things are mostly the same. Although London being coated in rain here makes it way more accurate to the real world. The only downside is that while the open-ended format is still here, it's pretty soulless. That's not to say the bigger console version was full to the brim with character, mainly because I think those NPCs just look really weird in that one. But everything this time is done by approaching floating icons, and a lot of these objectives are either high score challenges or simple one-trick objectives that take no time whatsoever to do. So while you're here, you can wave goodbye to anything even remotely cinematic popping up in this version, like the stolen car, the elephant stampede, or the shark attack, as none of that stuff is here. I would say it's all gone back to basics, but that's not exactly true because even Pro Skater 2 had some dynamic stuff going on, whereas here, levels are a lot bigger, but they're fully static. You'll make progress in the same way as you do on the PS2, spending pro points you earn from missions on new locations to go to, but here you can pick and choose what order they appear in thanks to this branching pathways layout, which is pretty cool, I guess. There's also a bonus level in here where you shrink down and skate around on a kitchen worktop, but even with cheat codes allowing me to skip missions one at a time, that would have taken way longer than I feel it's worth to unlock, so that ain't happening on this channel. It does look pretty cool for what it is though, so shout out to Square Eyed Jack for giving me some footage of this one. Aside from that, yeah, it's business as usual, really. If you like how Pro Skater 2 feels, then this is basically more of that, with a bunch of new mechanics thrown on top. And I can't really fault it too much given that it's all running on the PS1. It's not as accurate to the PS2 version as the PS1 version of Pro Skater 3 was to its PS2 counterpart, but you know what? It's okay. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible either, and I am glad I gave it a go because it was kind of fun in its own way. But I would say this PS1 port is probably just for those players that are curious about it really, because it is a bit of a novelty. And so that is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, and wow, what a roller coaster of a game this was. Overall, I did like this one, and it's easy for me to pinpoint things I do really like about it, with the overall control scheme and movement tech being a huge plus point for me. This all feels amazing to play, and for what it's worth, having the option to freely roam around between missions to use all of those moves was a fun way to just unwind whilst tricking around all over the place. But beyond that, I don't know, I just think the entire game does feel a bit confused at times. You know, I do admire the need to change things up, and to be honest, it probably was needed by this point, but this new format doesn't feel like it's fully committed to any of its ideas just yet, with a tendency to still include classic goals, but have them presented in a way that just doesn't really suit them. And overall, with things like the NPC interactions and the level layouts themselves feeling a little bit off at times, I'm just hoping things seem a bit more polished in that regard next time around. But as things are, I wouldn't say any of this is outright bad, and I can see why a lot of people do really like this one. But for me, I think Pro Skater 4 represents potential more than anything else, as in it does feel like the first step towards something properly new, and possibly something even better. But now we get to look towards the future and the next game in this series, which, after Pro Skater 4, well, you all know what that means. It's time for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5. It's time for Tony Hawk's Underground. And while I've not actually played it, I do know that this is the game that really shook up this franchise to the point where even the name was changed. So feel free to check in with me in the future, because next time in this series marathon, we'll be going underground.